Hello there all my lovely jewelry makers, I'm Christina of CSLdesigns, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make these cute wirework bow pendants. So they're made entirely of wire and will obviously work great as necklaces, but you can easily make them in different sizes and for instance make a pair of earrings as well. Now if you want to support me in any way, you can of course always like, share and subscribe, but there's also a super thanks button below the video so I can continue making these tutorials for you. Otherwise, if you want to learn how to make these cute bows for yourself, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we'll need. Now I'm using a regular round copper wire and the first gauge here is a 0.8mm. This will be our base wire. And then I'm going to be using a 0.4mm for the weaving wire. Now you can always play around with the gauges of your wires depending on the final size you want your piece to be. And then we also need our findings of course, so I've got a lobster claw clasp, an extended chain and a few jump rings to put it together. Along with the chain I'm going to hang my pendant on. And then of course we just need some pliers as well, so I've got my flush cutters to cut the wire with, tweezer nose and chain nose pliers to help manipulate the wire and for the jump rings. And then I'm just using my 6-step bail making pliers to help create the bail at the end. You can use any form of mandrel that you have. But like usual, you'll be able to find the full material list and useful links in the description box down below. Otherwise, let's get it all ready and let's get started. So then the wires that we'll need is first of all 2 lengths of the 0.8mm here, and these are about 30 centimeters long. Now of course that will depend on the final size of pendant that you want. So if you want a smaller bow, you can of course use shorter lengths, or equally if you want a bigger bow, you can use longer lengths. And as for the 0.4mm, I'm just leaving that attached to the reel, that way we have minimum wastage. Now the first thing I'm going to do is just measure my 0.4mm length here, because that way we know where to start, as I'm going to be leaving a bit of a tail. So I'm going to measure about 70 centimeters in. Of course again that might be different depending on the size that you're making. But then I know that this is my starting point, and then I'm just going to leave that tail so we can use that later on. Now if you don't feel comfortable leaving that long tail, you can always just start from the end and just add a new wire where I would be using the tail, then that's completely up to you. So first of all I want to attach this length of wire to my base wires, and I'm just going to start grabbing one of them. Now what we need to do as well is on the base wire find where the midpoint is, and that's in my case at the 15 centimeters. And then I just want to attach my length of 0.4mm wire here to 0.8mm, the base wire, by just wrapping it around 2 times like that, and just make sure the wraps are nice and tight. You just use your pliers if you need to. And then I'm going to grab the other length and just lay that above the first one, and then I'm going to bring the 0.4mm wire underneath that, so upwards, and then back over the top and down between the two. So I'm just wrapping around that top one by itself, and again at any point you can always squeeze things tight using your pliers, and I'm just going to wrap around it again. So a second time, come up around and down between the two. And then from here we need to start weaving one side of the bow. So what I'm going to do straight away before I continue weaving is separate the 2 base wires out from each other. So just kind of put your finger down between and make sure they're coming out away from each other at an angle. Now how much you do this will obviously also determine how your final piece is going to look, so that is also completely up to you. If you want it quite a small one, you can just have them closer, or if you want it quite a large bow, you can always push them further apart. But then what we're going to do is basically fill this in using our weaving wire, and that is then using the figure of 8 weave, which we've already started. So I'm coming down between the 2 and then gonna come down and around the bottom base wire twice. Again, just push that nice and tight, and then I'm moving up to go around the top base wire by itself, and again do that twice, and then straight down between them again. And I'm basically going to keep doing this for a while, which then fills in the space between the 2 base wires here. So now I've gotten a little bit further on, you can see the effect we're going to get, and what I mean when I say filling in the space between the 2 base wires. That is what the 0.4mm wire does with the figure of 8 weave that we're doing. But I'm just going to continue. So now I kept weaving here to the point where I want about this to be the size of my bow. So what we need to do is continue weaving, but now instead of graduating outwards inside, we need to come back inwards and make about the same length. So to do that, first of all, we just need to move our base wires. So we need to start bringing them closer together again. So we have something a bit like this in the shape. And just for reference as well, the length of this weave so far on mine is approximately 2.5 centimeters. So that just tells you roughly the size that I'm going to end up with. But then we need to continue weaving into a narrow point. It's still the same principle and the same weave we're doing, but what you're going to find is the wire is going to naturally want to slip towards the narrow point. So we obviously need to make sure we avoid that. So what I'm going to do is every time I go to make another wrap, I'm going to hold down the previous wraps that I made while I'm then doing the new wraps. So I'm just pushing them nice and tight to make sure they stay in place. And then I bring this up. As you can see, it wants to naturally slip towards the narrower point. So I'm gonna make sure I push that previous wrap down that I just did when I then come up and do the new wraps around the opposite wire. So that is basically how I'm going to avoid getting gaps and still getting a nice and tight weave, even though we're weaving to a narrower point. So you just want to keep going like this until you have about the same length as we do here. So this is now what it looks like. We almost get this fish shape, but this is then going to be one side of the bow. So I'm done using this weaving wire for now for this side. So what I'm going to do is just cut off the excess from the reel, and you want to leave a tail of about 30 centimeters or so. So I'm going to grab a new length of wire, and this is still attached to the reel. Now just make sure to leave about the same length of tail as we did initially, but then also grab your piece here, and then we basically just need to do the exact same thing as we did on this side. So we then create the other side of the bow. So first of all, I'm just going to attach this by wrapping it around twice on one length. Use your pliers if you need to, help push it tight. And then we want to start the figure of 8 weave, and I'm just going to wrap it around the other base wire as well before I then separate out my base wires. So of course you want to then get it as similar in size as the first one. So you can always use the first one as reference and just see how wide you made it, and of course then measure the same, or just do it by eye if you feel comfortable with that. But otherwise it's the exact same thing to create this little fish shape on this side, so we end up with the same thing on both sides. So I now finished weaving that side as well, and you can just cut off the wire from the reel, just leave the same length of tail as we did on the other end. And this is then what the piece looks like so far. So now we reach the point where we need to start shaping things. The first thing I'm going to do is just put my fingers in the middle and then just start pushing the sides forward a little bit, both of them. So they're kind of coming out towards the same side from the middle there. And then what I'm going to do is grab a mandrel of some sort. Now I'm just using a pencil. You can use whatever you have handy. And I'm just going to place it at about the midpoint behind one side first. And then make sure the weave is nice and tight. Bring the ends around, in this case the pencil, so the end of the weave meets up basically with the beginning of the weave on the back. And then we just want to repeat the same thing with the other one. So again, place your mandrel about the middle behind this weave and then bend the ends backwards again so the end of the weave meets up with the beginning of the weave on the back. And then you can slowly start to see we get that bow shape. Now I'm going to flip it around. Then what we want to do is make sure everything is in place here on the back. So I'm just going to work with one end at a time. What we need to do is separate the two wires coming from the same end. So one that's naturally towards one side, I'm going to bring completely straight towards that side. And the other one I'm going to bring towards the other side. Just get the other ones out of the way. Again, bend that so it goes straight upwards, opposite the other one. And just repeat the same with the other two. So we end up with the ends fitting nicely together like that, and I have two of the lengths of wire here coming out pretty much straight next to each other, and you can see this is what it looks like from the front. So what we need to do now is create that little part in the middle that kind of holds the bow together, and to do that I'm just going to take one of the short lengths of tail that we left. Now if you didn't leave any tails, you can always just start a new length of wire, doesn't really matter. So I'm going to be focusing on these two lengths of base wire now. I'm going to be weaving around them with this length of 0.4 mil, and I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to start wrapping around one length first of all, so the bottom one, just push that all the way down and just wrap around that again. And again, just going to make sure to get them nice and tight, and I'm going to just continue with the figure of 8 weave. So just go straight up to wrap around the top one by itself and do that once more. Wrap around the bottom one again. You can see we're just using the exact same weave. And I'm going to do this for a short length. So I have about 1.5 centimeters of the weave here. Now what we're going to do is have this come from the back where it is, and then I'm going to start bringing it across to the front. So we're bending it around the middle of the bow basically, and that's going to become that part that cinches and holds the bow in place in the middle, all the way around to the front. And then I just want to continue, and I'm going to bring it in between the other two lengths that were pointing in the other direction, and keep bringing it all the way around to the back again. So pretty much meet up with where it was coming from. Then I can just go in and cut off the excess of the weaving wire when I know I have the right length. Just make sure to tuck that end in. And then I also want to just cut down the actual base wires. So I'm going to cut them so there's just a little bit of an end left after where the weave ends. And do that with both of them. Then I'm just going to grab my tweezers and nose pliers, and I'm going to grab onto the very end there and just make sure to kind of push it in right in the middle there, and then just gently bend it outward a little bit so it goes out to the side. And this just makes sure that we basically tuck the ends away, because we don't want them to be able to stick out anywhere so they can catch or scratch on clothes or skin. So basically just get rid of both ends like that, so you can't feel them when you put your finger over it. And we've ended up with something like this. So you can see we are getting there with the bow. So what we have left are the two ends of the ribbon, you could say, and that's what we're going to use the other two base wires for. So I'm just going to work with one at a time. What we first all need to do is get the shape in place. So they're coming out nicely as they are. What we then need to do is find the point where they're going to basically be cut off, so the length of them. Obviously this is completely up to you how you want yours to look as well. I want it to be about that length. Then I'm going to push the wire against my pliers out towards the side where this wire is coming from. So this is the left one when I'm looking from the front, so I'm pushing it out towards the left. And then I'm going to just make another bend, and that's basically going to be the width, and then bend the wire against the pliers again, so they now come straight upwards back towards the bow, but make sure it's around the back. So you can see the wire is coming right at the back there. So this is the shape of one side, and then of course you can do the other side. You can either make them as symmetrical as possible to match, or make them purposely asymmetrical so they don't match perfectly, which can give it a little bit more life. That's completely up to you. But in my opinion, it doesn't have to be perfectly symmetrical, because an actual bow isn't really. But then create the same kind of shape on the other side here, again having this length also come up towards the back of the bow, and they are now crossing on the back. So this is the basic shape we have. What I'm going to do now is start to weave them. So obviously it's going to blend in nicely with the rest of it and actually look like it's one complete bow. And this is where my long tails of wire come in. Again, don't worry if you haven't left the tails, you can literally just start a new length of wire right up here where the narrowest part of this shape is. But I'm just going to grab the length that's closest, and then again I'm using the same figure of 8 weave, and this time though we are filling in a shape, so I'm going to have to come down through the shape to wrap around this bottom wire here by itself. First of all, push that all the way up as far as it'll go. Now bring it underneath the shape so we can wrap around the top one, again by just pushing the wire down through the shape, and then repeat a second time, bringing it through gently so we don't get any kinks or bends in the wire. And you just want to keep moving from side to side like this. So it's the same principle as when we were filling in these areas here, where we were going from a narrow point to a wider point, but because it's narrow to wide, you don't have to worry about the wire slipping like it did when we went from the wider to the narrower. So it's easy enough to just keep pushing it down to that narrowest point and get a nice tight weave, and we need to work our way all the way up towards where we have the end of the shape, of course. So now I've filled in the shape here, you can see I don't have any more space to weave back and forth. So what we just need to do is just wrap the wire around the base wire on the very bottom down here, just to make it blend in so we don't have any bare base wire anywhere. So you just want to wrap your wire all the way to the other end, and one through on the other end here. We can just do the last wrap, but instead of bringing it through, because I'm out of space, we can cut off the excess. So I just have a short little end left, which I'm then going to grab my tweezers and nose pliers and just make sure to tuck in. To basically just continue the wrap so the end of the wire is nicely tucked out of the way. So that is one done, and then of course we just need to do the same with the other shape. So grab the other long length of wire and just start filling it in the exact same way, and of course finish it off just like I showed you there as well. So the bow itself is finished now, and we'll get rid of most of the wires as well. What we have left are 2 ends of base wire that are coming out towards the top, and then I have 1 length of weaving wire left. So these are what we're going to use to make our bail with, so we can of course hang this on something and actually use it. Now I'm going to grab my tweezers and pliers here, and what I'm going to do is place them just before the point where these 2 wires start to cross over each other, and I then want to push the wire so it comes straight upwards, so something like that. And then the same with the one on the other side. Just place your pliers and then push the wire against the pliers so that also comes straight upwards, and we end up with these 2 lengths. And then we're going to use the last length of 0.4mm that we have to weave these 2 lengths together and create our bail with. So I'm going to grab the length of 0.4mm here, and what you can do is just use the same figure of 8 weave, that's up to you, but I'm going to just use a diagonal wire weave for this. So go around the bottom one first, and then over the top of both of them, come down behind, up between both base wires to wrap around the top one by itself. Now I do have a more detailed tutorial where I show this wire weave, so I'm going to leave a link to that. Otherwise we just need to weave a short length here of whichever weave you prefer. So I have about 2 centimeters of weave here. Then what I'm going to do is just push it forward a bit, and then I'm going to shape it, and for that I'm just going to use my 6-step bail making pliers, but you can use whatever kind of mandrel you have. So just place the pliers behind the weaved section and then bring the end down to basically meet up with the beginning part of the weave, and then we have a little loop like this, which is going to be the bail, and then we just need to finish it off. Now what I'd like to do is use the remaining of this weaving wire here to just secure it in place. So I'm basically just going to bring the end through some of the other base wires. So I'm connecting this end of the bail to the main part of the piece and basically just securing it in place. So bring it around a couple of times like that, and make sure to pull it nice and tight. And then I just want to finish off the 0.4mm here by wrapping it around a single base wire a couple of times, so it's going to be nice and secure. And then we can just go in and cut off the excess. So just like all the other times, leave a short little tail that we can then tuck in by kind of just continuing the wrap and get it out of the way. Then we just have these 2 ends of the base wire left, so I'm going to cut them down. So there's just a short little end coming out after where the weave ends, just like that. And then what we want to do is just grab onto those ends. You can do one at a time or both at the same time with your pliers and just basically bend them inwards, so the actual end of the wire is tucked into the piece rather than coming out and catching or scratching on anything. So just make sure you can't feel it with your fingers. But that is now all the wires finished off, and we have our complete bow, and we have our bail there where we can put a chain through or whatever else you want to hang it on. And of course, like I said, you can easily make this in different sizes and for different purposes. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and do feel free to check out my channel. I have loads of different tutorials within many mediums, so there'll be plenty there for you to have a look at. Otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you so much for watching it, and I'll see you in the next one.